Good morning and welcome to Inside Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. I'm your host, Lynn Newman. Today we're going to talk about multimedia journalism with a visiting American scholar and veteran journalist, Mindy McAdams, who has been teaching at the University of Padjajaran in Bandung, UnPad, on a Fulbright fellowship. Welcome, Mindy. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
Bright and early. You don't look like you mind the morning at all.
I'm awake. I had coffee. This good Indonesian coffee.
Oh,
I
yes,
love it. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we get into some of the things you've been doing at UnPad and your Fulbright activities, I know that you're an expert on multimedia journalism, building multimedia packages, the online side of our business. So let's start with the question that you said everybody always asks you. Is the print newspaper going to die?
I used to hesitate a lot before I answered that question and kind of hedge and say maybe, maybe not, but by now, by this year, I think I have to say yes, the print newspaper will die. And to see the evidence, I mean, all you have to do in Indonesia is just ask people, when was the last time you bought a newspaper or read a newspaper? People will tell you they read one online or they read it on their handphone.
Sure.
But buy a paper newspaper or even borrow one or pick one up, people don't do it. And if you go, you know, if you see people waiting for the Trans-Jakarta busway, nobody's reading a newspaper. In a restaurant, people will be looking at their phone, but they won't be reading a newspaper. Yeah,
for the most part, even in Starbucks, where I still read newspapers, having been a newspaper editor and reporter most of my life. But, you go into Starbucks, there's always that big rack of newspapers everywhere, and Starbucks is very popular here, but they go unread for the most part. I mean, occasionally somebody will pick one up and read it, but it's unfortunate. Do you think we're diminished somehow by the loss of print or the decline of print? Does it change the quality of life?
No, you know, I'm not really concerned about the medium itself and like news in a newspaper disappearing or the printed package of the newspaper. But I'm really concerned about journalism because I think a population in a democracy, the people need independent journalism. They just need it so that they know what's really happening. Because without it, the government can do anything. I mean, you could have Nazi Germany all over again, because, or you could have the genocide in Cambodia, because nobody knows what's happening if you don't have journalism. So if the journalism continues online and mobile apps, then I'm okay. But if the journalism cannot be supported because the old advertising model doesn't work, then we're all in trouble. Well,
in Indonesia, something like 87% of the ad market here is TV still.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
mostly
great.
TV.
I didn't know that.
Mostly TV.
Yeah, okay.
And then there's 10-12% that's still print.
Yeah.
Online is only about 1 or 2%.
Yes, we have
now it's doubling. It's doubling. Yeah. Every year, so it's going up steadily, but it's starting from a very low base.
Yeah. We have the same problem in the United States, where newspapers have actually closed, like the Rocky Mountain News, the Albuquerque newspaper.
The Detroit paper went to weekends.
Right.
In Seattle.
And just recently, the New Orleans newspaper went from 7 days to 3 per week, right? And why? Because the advertisers are buying less. If the advertisers buy less, you can't print as much because the paper and the ink costs money, let alone the journalists, right? So that model of advertising paying is diminishing. It will probably diminish for TV news here, right? I mean, people will still pay, the advertisers will still buy ad space on Cinetron and movie channels and things like that.
It will eventually diminish here, but TV penetration is still, it's about 99% in Indonesia. It's everywhere.
And people love TV.
And online is not yet there, so it will eventually start to decline and go digital here, probably quicker than we realize because of the mobile revolution here is so amazing.
And I think there's another issue too about news versus the rest of TV. When people watch the news, like the lady who cleans my apartment 3 mornings a week, right? Of course she watches TV news. But here she is, she doesn't have a lot of education, but she's quite smart. and we speak in English. And she uses the internet. She has one of those USB things for her computer. She has a computer. And she checks a lot of the things that she sees on the TV news in Indonesia.
Oh, how interesting.
She checks on...
Then she goes to Dedek and say, let's see if they're telling
or she just goes to Google. And then she and I sometimes have a conversation about the news because she has found conflicting reports.
Oh, interesting. We're gonna have to take a break there.
Okay.
We're out of time for this segment. We come back, I want to talk about how you got involved in online and made the right move, made the right switch. You're watching Insight Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. Stay with us. Welcome back to Insight Indonesia, brought to you by the Jakarta Globe. Today we're talking with Mindy McAdams, who is a professor of online journalism, I guess we would say, multimedia at University of Florida, who's been visiting Indonesia for the last year as a Fulbright scholar. Now, one of the things I'm curious about is, back in the 90s, you made the switch. You moved over to the online side at a time when most of our colleagues were still thinking, it's going to keep going.
Or they thought it was a toy that wouldn't last long.
Sure. How did you come to make the switch to move over to the digital side?
It was really not as amazing as some people think, because I moved over very early. I was interested in online journalism in around 1987, and why? Because I already had a computer. And I was already on CompuServe, so I was using bulletin boards and things like that. And in my normal journalism job, I was a copy editor at a business paper that specifically covered the computer and telecom industries. But not because of that, because as a copy editor, you're always waiting for the journalist to finish writing. And while you're waiting, you read the wires. And the wires are on your computer screen. And I thought, if everybody in the world could get their news this way, they would like it better than, opening all these pages and everything. So I went to university for a master's degree, and I wanted to study technology. And I hoped that someday I could work on putting a newspaper online. Later, when I worked for the Washington Post, I got that chance.
Oh, wow, how interesting. Well, just as a sideline, I mean, I'm obviously old enough to have started before the internet, but when I became a freelance journalist out in Asia, I arrived with a manual typewriter. And used to take, type stories manually, take them to a wire agency, and they put them in the telex. But that was in '83 or something, within 3 years, I had one of the early little Radio Shack laptops.
The Model 100.
Trash 100, that held 80 characters or something. And had made the switch. So I made the switch in the mid-'80s. And most of us did, who were in the field, because it was just easier. And
it was easier to send your stories back because they were already digital.
And at that point it was, anyway, enough war stories about Back when I was a lad, and we did it by cave painting.
But I also started in my journalism school at Penn State in the U.S. Our classes used manual typewriters when I was an undergrad.
There you go.
In my bachelor's.
So you can remember remember them too.
But as soon as I went into a job, my first job, we didn't use typewriters.
Now, but tell us what you've been doing in Indonesia. Tell us about your Fulbright and what it's been like to teach here.
Well, I came here to teach. A Fulbright can apply for a research grant or a teaching grant or a combination. And I applied for teaching only. And I asked to go to Padjajaran in Bandung because it's the only journalism bachelor's degree from a public university.